All right, what about now? Now we're good. Okay. All right, thank you all for being here. The ladies' class is also meeting tonight, if you so wish to attend and are qualified. All right. So let's talk about evangelizing the denominations. This was a class that I worked with some of the elders to prepare for several months now. Previously, I had worked on a church history class, and it just continually became so evident to me how alternate many of the systems are out there. Just completely alternate in practice, in concept, in certain belief system. It's just very alternate. And it personally made me thankful that I'm here, right? Personally made me very thankful for my upbringing. But again, not everybody has that, right? So again, just a warning, I'll put this in every class warning, you will hear false doctrine. So if you fall asleep in the middle and you pop up and you're like, he just said what? Just come talk to me. I'm happy to clarify, right? I am happy to clarify. So you will hear false doctrines in this class. So pay attention. All right. So class format, right? There will be a little extra church history up front, and we'll start at Roman Catholicism, right? I mean, that's really where it starts. That's where the drift starts in history. What are the significant teachings? What are the contrasting scriptures? What's the source of authority, right? Depending on the denomination, it's going to be, well, okay, let's go ask the priest, or, well, let's consult the creed, or something else, right? When you're evangelizing to these people, what could you possibly find common ground on? You're going to find some common ground. What could you find it on? Why would people find a certain denomination attractive? Now, I'll be careful with that one, right? I mean, I'm telling you why I'll find it attractive, not why you should find it attractive, but why they should find it, right? Why they might find it attractive, okay? And what are the new responsibilities that they're going to have, right? For instance, if they're in a once saved, always saved church, and you say, no, it's possible to become lost, and they believe that, well, how do I do that? How do I actually endure, right? If you take out some of the foundation of their belief system, how are you going to help them install something that's accurate and scriptural, right? So we'll go through those. So, sound doctrine, a warning for the church. Let's start here. There we go. 1 Corinthians 4:6. I have applied all these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, brothers, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor against one another. The early church is so pure. If you read Acts, you see that they had everything in common. It's really an echo of the tabernacle, right? It's an echo of the tabernacle. If you think of the excessive and wonderful amount of free will offerings that are coming into the tabernacle, you think of the excessive, not exactly, but free will offerings that are heading in the direction of the new church, right? It's a beautiful echo on the two. But time goes on, persecution comes, and things change. Every generation produces a group of men with leadership ability who are not satisfied to leave the church as God created it. And that's what happens, sadly. It's happening today. Some are restoring, some are drifting. But again, let's start at Roman Catholicism. Yeah. It's not what it looks like in here, to say the least. It's different. It's quite different. It's alternate. Grand cathedrals, grand vestments, the clothing, right? Grand ceremonies, phrases spoken in Latin. That changed after Vatican II. It's complex. We could do an entire quarter just on Roman Catholicism. I'm not sure that would be beneficial, but we could. It is complex. It's a large system. There are parades, ceremonies, relics, It just goes on and on. I mean, it's extensive. The more I read, the more there is to read on Roman Catholicism. There we go. Okay, so in the early church, if you think of the positions, so the positions that they have that do eventually fade away, they have the apostles, right? They have the prophets. So the story that we have up there, Paul getting a hug, it's in Acts. Who wants to tell me what's happening there? Who knows? I can give you a clue. No? Close. I think that's close. I think this is the picture where Agabus the prophet tells that Paul is going to be bound, right? He's going to be bound. They're not going to see him again. Things are coming to a close. Paul could turn cities upside down. If you look at Acts, you will see that it's written, I'll show him how much he has to suffer. He also, I think, suffers mental anguish because he's the one that's knowing that what's going to happen to the future of the church, right? He's been told things. We have those verses. He knows that vicious wolves are going to come in. He does have to suffer many things. Let's keep going. Of course, I think many of you know the verse about deacons, right? There's a problem with widows and the distribution of food. Deacons are set up to make sure that's done appropriately and fairly. You have elders gathering and discussing, and then you have teachers who are very responsible, bringing up the next generation. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. When those roles start to drift, that's when the church goes. Studying church history, I've seen it time and time again. When you lose those roles, you lose the church. That's how it is. Interestingly, we didn't see deacons in this list. Any theories why? They're servants. But we also see deacons teaching, right? So you can have multiple roles. Like, of course, elders can also be teachers and should be teachers, right? You see individuals doing multiple roles when applicable, right? So there is that. Elders, plural, right? It's plural. You should have multiple of them. The first verse, appoint elders in every town. The second, now from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church to come to him. Elders. To all the saints in Christ Jesus who were at Philippi with the overseers and deacons. The next one. And when they had appointed elders for them in every church, with prayer and fasting they committed them to the Lord whom they had believed. This one's key. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you. Among you. Hang on to that. Exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. All right. Okay, so at this point, I really wanted to find out what happened to the early church and how did we get to the Pope? What happened in between? This was my question, right? Because that drift in leadership really empowered just about every other doctrine. It really did. Right? How did the leaders permit some of these doctrines that we see in Roman Catholicism to actually get there? So I started looking through the historians, and it wasn't exactly easy, as if you go to the Catholic websites, it's like, well, it took a while to sort things out, but here we are. It's complicated. But we'll start here with this historian, Johann Moschim. Such was the constitution of the early church in its infancy, when its assemblies were neither numerous nor splendid. 3 or 4 presbyters, that's a Greek word for elders, men of remarkable piety and wisdom, ruled these small congregations in perfect harmony, Nor did they stand in need of any president or superior to maintain concord and order where no dissensions were known. All the churches in those primitive times were independent bodies, none of them subject to the jurisdiction of another. Nor does there appear in this first century any vestige of that structured association of churches in the same provinces. A little flowery, though, right? A little flowery language, but these churches are autonomous, right? These churches have elders, and there's not an overhead structure. And as I kept going through, so this guy was German Protestant. It's really amazing to see these denominations who have vast structures say these things. They all admit how it was like in the beginning. Some believe that presbyter was the title of dignity and that bishop was a corresponding title of function. But the facts presented in 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7, and 5, 17 through 22 do not warrant such a conclusion. The only difference between presbyters and bishops seems to have been a difference in name. It's the same role as we do it, right? Here's another one, a Methodist. Presbyters or elders were the highest local authority in the church. With them rested the chief responsibility both for the government, of the Christian society and for the provision of suitable instruction. The common mention of them in the plural shows that a number were elected to the office in each church. They formed a presiding council. A presiding council analogous to the board of elders in the Jewish synagogue. Yeah. It was from the Jewish synagogue that the name of presbyter or elder was borrowed. Originally, both names related entirely to the same office. The New Testament recognizes no distinction between them. Okay. So I'm going to skip this one. It'll go out with the email. But this guy, Henry Sheldon, Methodist, he's saying the same thing, right? And this next one, Lynn Coleman, Presbyterian, same thing. You get the point. And here's a guy from the Christian church. The church at Rome was still using the term bishop and presbyter interchangeably until the year 140 AD. Elder, presbyter, bishop. It's quite fascinating that the denomination historians or fellowship, whatever, historians will agree how it was in the beginning. All right. Sorry, this one's a little small. But essentially, we have up there elder or presbyter, presbyteros. The next word you see in the Bible is episkopos, overseer or bishop. And the next one, poimen, shepherd or pastor. And you see them in different places, but they refer to the same role. The scriptural account describes the early church as an eldership of equals, with several scriptures using different descriptive words to summarize duties. Okay, that's how it is. It's a point of confusion, and really I think it's a point of convenience for some denominations. Yeah?
Brian, we look at history
Yeah.
that we have recorded.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice, all those started in 18th century?
Which things?
18th century,
Uh-huh.
18th century. When those
Oh, the historians?
writing
Yes.
history. But there's a big gap in it.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years.
Right. Even before the Catholic was hundreds of years before they had some evidence that was taking place.
Yes.
If you look at the early church,
Mm-hmm.
the early church, as you mentioned in your introduction, they were autonomous.
Yeah.
The Bible teaches autonomy. It doesn't teach anything else. And so it took several hundred years before the autonomy maybe started breaking down.
Right.
To where they started these groups, big groups. Kind of like we have mega churches today.
Mm-hmm.
They have a bunch of little churches.
Yes.
And they didn't work together. They didn't need to because the scriptures gave them all that they needed for us to, even today,
Yeah.
for us to operate. So that what I'm saying is there's no history.
Right.
Because there was no need to write history from that standpoint because they didn't all work together.
Yeah.
They worked, as the scriptures say,
No, I see your point. What happens later is the state becomes so fused with the church that it becomes inconceivable to have a level of autonomy that a local church would need. So, no, I appreciate that.
See that with the Roman
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
coming in, bringing that in, but still, I just can't believe that there's still, the church is still not in existence. It's always in existence. It's just not written about.
It's hard. It's hard because when you get to the Middle Ages, the persecution is so intense, right? The churches that are going to remain separate from Roman Catholicism or in any part of the world have to really hide, and they're not going to write about it. So, yes.
Can I make one other statement?
Yeah, sure.
If we go back to the Old Testament and we see the law of Moses
Mhm.
and we see the tabernacle, what happened between there for the next several hundred years? Did the church stay, did the body stay in perfect harmony through that time? Did the tabernacle worship stay in harmony? I don't think it did. I think it was really just very disjointed through those times.
Yeah, I certainly understand that. There's, especially in the Old Testament, right, there's periods of drift, reemergence, restoration, and reformation, right? And those come in cycles. Yeah,
I think God works with us.
he does.
I think he's gracious. He has to be with all that we see that's taken place in the history that we know about.
I think God is patient.
Or that we're patient with ourselves.
No, I see your point. I see your point. No, I appreciate the comments. What we see in 150 AD is you start to see in some places, right? Changes don't just sweep across Europe and Asia Minor and all these other places. It takes a while to propagate. Well, what we see in 150 AD is a elder of elders, an exalted elder still at a local church, a special elder. It was then judged necessary, as the churches grew, that one man of distinguished gravity and wisdom should preside in the council of presbyters, in order to distribute among his colleagues their several tasks, and to be a center of union to the whole society. Right? So now we have a special elder. We're starting to drift. That's not in the Bible. In many congregations, one of the presbyters, as the president of the board of presbyters, became distinguished from the general body as ranked as primus inter pares. Such development would have been entirely natural and would have served as a suitable means of transition to those local bishops who appear after the apostolic age to meet modern Roman Catholicism. Right? He basically says, remember the direction we're heading. But the New Testament does not inform us of the growth even of this distinction. It nowhere raises one presbyter above the rest and clothes him with special dignity as a bishop. A bishop, in the later sense, as an office distinct from the presbyter, nowhere appears within the New Testament horizon. I'm just chuckling because this is a Methodist. Okay, so now we get to the 200s. Now we get to the 200s. This was shocking. We have a bishop over the eldership. They begin separating these words, bishop and then presbyter. This person was at first styled the angel of the church. I assume they're pulling from Revelation, to which he belonged, but was afterward distinguished by the name of bishop or inspector, a name borrowed from the Greek language, and expressing the principal part of the episcopal function, which was to inspect and superintend the affairs of the church. Okay, so now you have a bishop above the elders, or above the presbyters. That's still very common today in denomination land. Very common. All right, we're going to summarize this one. But yeah.
I think maybe it's an application to us, is we need to be careful that we don't accidentally elevate, say, one elder
Yeah.
above the rest.
Yeah.
I've been part of congregations where
You saw that?
maybe accidentally,
Mm-hmm.
maybe an elder was the wealthiest of the group.
Mm.
And so he was kind of elevated, well, because he gave the most to the congregation or something, right? Or maybe someone was a really good teacher among the group of elders, and so they kind of elevated him.
Mm-hmm.
So just maybe a caution to us and the churches today that we don't intentionally or unintentionally do move towards the same structure.
It's a very good point. I remember my parents, when we were in a certain city, taking me to a certain mega church, and they very much said, we don't agree with these practices, we don't agree with the direction they're going, but we want you to see this for yourself, and we're going to talk about it at home. Okay, I know not all parenting, you may not agree with that decision, I'm just telling you the story. Okay, and this was a preacher who had become very famous, and there were actually 5 baptisms that Sunday. It blew my mind because at the baptistry, imagine there's plexiglass and a lever, and this preacher would put a hand on him and pull this lever, and a chair would go back, they would be baptized and come up. And that whole contraption was designed so that preacher could be the one baptizing. I thought it was a cool contraption, but I did, right? I thought it was a pretty cool contraption, right? But I'm an engineer. But again, we need to be careful about that, to Mark's point. All right? Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that comment. All right. So the diocesan bishop, well, I'll summarize. As time goes on, guess what happens? Now we have a bishop over a whole diocese, right? A larger scope of land. Now this is an important part. So if you read halfway down, then things reached the point where suburban churches began to develop so that people in the outlying areas were not traveling to the inner city church on Sundays anymore. Right? You get it. You got people out in the country, you got people in the city, that's just natural. Presbyters took portions of the Lord's Supper elements blessed directly from the hands of the bishop to the outlying churches. Here, a full worship service was held under the delegated authority from the downtown bishop. The presbyter then returned to the bishop's house. Okay, you see that? The bishop is the one doing the Lord's Supper, blessing the Lord's Supper with his hands, right? And then it's being taken. You start to get this idea about the bishop, right? And it's going to develop. I see some people looking serious, and you should look serious at this. It's not good. The first bishops were generally bishops of individual churches. In the largest cities, a number of congregations may have been under a single bishop, but these congregations were regarded as branches of the one church city, satellite churches. That's what we might call them now. Each separate community had, as a rule, its own bishop. This sufficiently provided by the great number of bishops found within a given territory. All right? So now we start to see the main downtown church and then satellite churches, with the main church and the bishop presiding over the Lord's Supper, and that Lord's Supper being carried all the way out to the country, because apparently they can't do it on their own in the country. Yeah. Yeah.
Where does the transition occur where the churches start meeting in a designated place owned by the congregation or by a member of the congregation?
So good question. If you didn't hear it, when does the transition take place for when they moved out of homes to other places? So places they met, it was in homes. When it was dangerous to meet, such as the Diocletian persecution, awful time. They would meet in catacombs. The answer really is basically when it was safe enough to do so. At some parts in the 200s, it was safe enough to do so, and we're an area that Christians spread. Usually you'd get the leftover pagan temple, right? Right, because it's a building, and people would be like, man, you remember what happened here? But you'd get the leftover pagan temple. They did build some buildings, and then when Christianity becomes legal, in 1313, and then official in 381, it starts exploding, right? Yeah.
So in the very early days, the Jewish
Yes, the synagogue.
would meet in the synagogue.
Yeah.
It's available on Sunday.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, the synagogue. And you even think about, I've wondered how many Jewish elders simply turn into Christian elders, right? If so qualified. All right. The diocesan bishop attended all legal matters, supervised the finances, arranged for the transfer of priests to new places, and sanctioned their journeys. They surrounded themselves with a court, a bodyguard, and a host of servants. Sounds cozy, doesn't it? Quite different from the shepherds of earlier periods. They're holding court at this point. Right? These are like minor nobility. Now, here's the watershed moment. Like I mentioned, and thank you for that question. 325, the emperor converts. This must have seemed amazing at the time, right? Decades of persecution are coming to an end. Persecution had been extremely intense in prior generations. It had fallen off a little bit, right? But in Rome, and this happened in several waves, in Rome, when things start going bad, you've probably heard they blame the Christians. Well, the thinking goes, well, the old gods of Rome must not be happy, right? Look at what these Christians are doing. We're not sacrificing to the right gods anymore, so we got to clean up these Christians. That's how the thinking would go, right? Because gods were tied to the land. It's a very transactional nature, right, in paganism, almost all paganism. You do something, hopefully they pay attention, and then they send the blessings to you. Very transactional. Okay, so persecution starts winding down when the emperor converts. The bishop of the chief city of each province was called the metropolitan. Okay, now we're getting up to the metropolitan area, even larger than the diocese. That's where that word comes from. So I went ahead and wrote, history records Emperor Constantine winning a spectacular battle for control of Rome with his army, who fought under the sign of the first two letters of Christ, Chi Rho, likely painting their banners and shields. He converts, assuming the Roman emperor will remain the Pontifex Maximus, maximum priest. You can also translate that to like bridge builder, bridging between the gods and the people. To show his piety, he commissions 50 full Bibles, decides to host a conference in the Acts 15 style, minus the apostles, which the chapter notes 4 times. Right? Strangely notes 4 times, interestingly. They are there to solve the Arianism heresy, which was Jesus was created, which you can blow right away with John 1, which was splitting the church. Okay, a conference is called. He wants to see Christianity be a grand endeavor. He sees himself as the benefactor, right? He's the emperor. And so that is another way, like yes, there were churches being built before this, and we have found that in archaeology, but he wants to see even more churches being built, more Bibles being produced, right? He is the benefactor. But this benefactor comes at a cost, right? Well, how did he convert? Again, it's not in Scripture, so I cannot tell you if this was a vision for God or just a vision or just a dream. I don't know, and I'm not going to know. But the way the story goes is Constantine is coming back to Rome. He's fighting his way back to Rome, and this would often be how it went, right? An army says, a general of an army says, I'm the emperor, and then someone far away says, no, you're not, and they keep getting close to each other, and it was thought that the gods will decide through battle. Right? Those are the old ways. That's the human ways. That's how leaders were made. So he has a midday dream, and in his dream, as the story goes, he sees in the sky a Chi and a Rho, that symbol that the Christians make, the first 2 letters of Christ in the Greek. And he says, aha, I will devote myself to Christ. I will paint my banners. I will paint my shields, and we will fight under the banner of Christ. And they win spectacular victories. And that's how the first Roman emperor converts. But again, it's a blessing and a curse. So now you have the emperor funding councils, right? And those councils produce binding decisions that the metropolitans, the / diocesan bishops, depending where you are, carry to the presbyters, and now there's even more reinforcement that the deacons work for the presbyters. Right? It's not just like, hey, deacons, go do what you do. It's like, oh, you very much work for the presbyter. They're establishing a very strong command structure. Right? So when Constantine, for instance, hosts the Council of Nicaea, it must have been amazing to the bishops, presbyters, any deacons that were invited, because they could have remembered the persecution, the harsh persecution. And he pays for travel, entertainment, food, lodging, and he's also a non-Arianism proponent, right? Basically, he does not believe Jesus was created. So at least he has the correct doctrine on that one. But again, this council's going to vote on it, and he does not invite bishops, that many bishops that are against his position, right? So he's inviting a select amount of people, ones that are more likely to agree, and funding the entire endeavor, right? The state is now very fused to Christianity. Again, this is a template, though. This is one-man preeminence. At this point, we also start to see extra phrases to be said before baptism. His mother, her name's Helena, she's off gathering relics in Rome because she's converted to Christianity. She finds the true nails of the cross, and in Roman fashion sticks it in his armor for divine protection. You see a lot of new teachings starting to come in, like just sticking it in his armor like it's a video game or something. It's wild. All right. A bishop in the later sense nowhere appears within the New Testament horizon. Evangelists like Timothy and Titus were remote from that type of officer. They were simply trusted friends and ministers extraordinary of the apostles, no more like the bishops of the 2nd century, and a special ambassador is like a permanent governor of a specified district. Now, this is interesting. You start to see records and thinking that if someone in the Bible appointed a presbyter, oh, they must have been a bishop. So there's a Catholic claim that Timothy and Titus were bishops and pastors. So that's something to know just in case you're ever studying with a Catholic and they're like, oh yeah, Timothy was a bishop. What? Excuse me? No, it doesn't say that at all. They were incredible in their own right, but it doesn't say they were a bishop. It doesn't say that. All right. At this council, they decide some fascinating things that are binding. I've picked a few for you. The first one, disqualification of certain eunuchs from becoming a presbyter or a bishop. If you're a eunuch, I know, right? I don't know, I could explain it, but I'm not going to. All right. Ask me after class. Husband of one wife, right? We're just ask me after class. Excommunication is universal. Appeals courts may happen in Lent and autumn. So if you are excommunicated from a church, you are excommunicated from the Catholic Church. See how the power is increasing? Again, they're binding this through a council. Bishop of Alexandria and Bishop of Rome have preeminence over large areas, et cetera, et cetera. Guess where this one will lead? Right? Bishop of another place is confirmed to be titled. They get very political. Please actually examine the soundness of presbyter candidates before ordination. There was a story of one man who converted from paganism and then was made a presbyter 8 days later. So, also there's qualifications for elders about new Christians. Now, this one's interesting. Those during persecution, especially the persecution of Licinius, the co-emperor, they had been lapsy, right? Lapsed. There was extreme anger over Christians who did things like gave up the hiding location of a bishop or a priest, turned in scripture. Like imagine, like this person's like, yeah, I'll give you the Ephesian letter if I can stay out of prison. And it's destroyed. It's gone. It's gone. And you're in your church wondering, will we ever get the Ephesian letter? We're going to have to find the other churches that are in hiding just to get Ephesians back. Because you know they divided it up to try and keep it safe, right? Don't put a whole Bible in one place. So it's like, will we ever get this book of the Bible back? There's serious fear about that. All sorts of things happened during that time. And so it's extremely hard for them to reconcile with individuals who wanted back in the church, who had actively betrayed the church in those manners. That's a huge challenge for them. And so the council says, no leniency for those who lapsed in the persecution, but eventual mercy should be given. But they need to do penance. Penance. You see, what is the Catholic concept of penance? Someone let me know. Anybody know? What? Payments? Not quite. What is penance? What's that? Prayers, works, making up for something in works, right? Sometimes long periods of basically repayment through your action for those sins. So for instance, you see this start to creep in. It's prescribed 12 years of penance if you were especially bad, 3 years as a hearer. You don't get to ask questions in class. 4 years as a prostrator. I assume during at certain times you have to prostrate on the ground while maybe the bishop is speaking, naturally, right? And then 2 years of group prayer. They're just making stuff up at this point. The latched catechumens, these are the learners. They are allowed to pray with others after 3 years of penance, being a hearer only, if they lapsed. Right? Presbyters and deacons are discouraged from lending at high rates of interest. Now, this is another interesting one. Communion must come from the hands of the bishop or the presbyter, then to the deacon. Non-compliant deacons shall be dismissed. If the deacon touches the Lord's Supper first and then hands it to the presbyter, that is very bad. That is very, very bad. Or the bishop, right? They start establishing this. The Lord's Supper must come from the elder. That's their doctrine. And I know I'm seeing some faces out there, but you see this out in the denominations that, oh, who does the Lord's Supper? The pastor. Yeah. That's a good question. So those who lapsed, were they considered saved during this period? From what I've read, I think they were considered saved, but I think there was just such anger and such human rationale that it's like, well, yeah, they're saved, but they gotta pay for what they did, right? They gotta pay for selling out that bishop to the Romans. Humans have a hard time forgiving, don't we? That's a good question. And I think that was their logic. Yeah, they're saved, but sounds like they're never really going to get any punishment, so we have to make sure they get some. Or later you get into the idea of sacramental grace, but at this point, I think it was a struggle with forgiveness. Sacramental grace comes later. Deacons may not sit among the presbyters. It is contrary to canon and rank. So again, imagine if we have a deacon in the church and they're sitting near the presbyters, that's a big no-no. You might even consider that a James 2 violation, but we'll continue. Right. Again, the communion, this is later in the Middle Ages. I'll turn the page here. Later in the Middle Ages, you're seeing the communion come straight from the bishop. Here you see communion being carried on a cloth, people kneeling before the bishop or before Christ, or it's before the bishop, and receiving communion from the hands of the bishop directly into their mouth, not being allowed to touch the communion. It is still performed that way. Not in all places. Yes, you've seen it. Weddings. They'll line up. Yep. Yep. That's where it comes from. Now, this writing is, it's hard to date it. It's from this period. It was recently discovered that it may have been a large forgery in terms of time period, someone claiming to be a bishop, an early bishop, but recent scholarship, or recent critics, basically, recent non-Catholic critics, believe that it's later. It lines up perfectly with what's going on after the Council of Nicaea. See that ye follow the bishop as Jesus Christ does the Father, and the presbyters as he would the apostles, and reverence the deacons as a commandment of God. Without the bishop, let no one do any of those things connected with the church. Let that be deemed a proper Eucharist, that's the rebranding of the Lord's Supper, which is administered either by the bishop or by him to whom he has entrusted it. Whether the bishop shall appear, there is the Catholic Church. It is not lawful without the bishop either to baptize or make an agape. Did you catch that? It's not lawful to baptize without the bishop or make an agape. I would think they're talking about the agape feasts that you see at the early church. Don't. If you're feasting, right, don't leave out the bishop. But whatsoever he shall approve, that is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secure and valid. All right, I'll keep it going to get to a good stopping point. The church was no longer understood to be of the holy people of God believing on Jesus Christ, rather a group of persons belonging to the churches of the bishops. The personal communion with God and the assurance of the presence of Christ was now definitively conditioned by strict adherence to certain outward forms. This is the essence of Catholicism. And let's remember the verse, for there is one God and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Jesus Christ. Again, this is still the essence of Catholicism. And this is later, but now you're praying to a saint who is well connected to Jesus. You're praying to Mary, who is well connected to Jesus. You are venerating certain icons or statues who had a large amount of grace and were endowed with such. You're confessing to a priest. You're not I could go on. There, you are deprioritized over the key people who have had excesses of grace in their life or in their service, and you go through them. All right, let's keep it going a little bit more. An evolving change of focus. There is no salvation outside of the church. And remember who the church belongs to? The bishop. Yeah. Yes, there are very few that can actually read, yeah. Yes.
Like to us, this sounds unbelievable,
Yes.
but it really is not when they have a construct of individuals who are very few that were educated well enough to even be able to read.
Yes.
We have to trust them to teach you correctly.
Correct.
And so it is important to know. I mean, as you go through here,
Yeah.
but you can see how early on it can be easy to sway and change people's mind or get to this point because they wouldn't know if it was right or wrong at all.
Right?
They couldn't even check for themselves. It may end, to your point, they didn't have this,
Right.
the word in a printed form easily available to them that they could pick up even if they couldn't read it.
That's true. Yes. So to Chris's point, literacy was limited. It gets even worse after the Roman Empire falls. The barbarians, the German barbarians, which is, let's be honest, most of our ancestors, don't even have a written language. And when they do get one, it's the Bible, and their missionary doesn't even give them the Book of Kings because he says you're too violent and you're not ready for it. Right? These are rough times. These are rough times. So yes, literacy is limited. I'll speed it up just a little bit here. Of course, you get patriarchs over the metropolitans. Patriarchs are like the patriarch of Alexandria, the patriarch of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's not going to last much longer, right? There's going to be a change in leadership. Rome is destroyed, but the Catholic Church continues. I'll go ahead and skip the justifications that the Bishop of Rome had for why he should be preeminent, but I will note one of the major points was as Rome collapsed and leadership failed, the barbarians just keep coming. They all wanted a piece of Rome. Attila the Hun shows up, like, let's get down to business and defeat the Huns, if you're a fan of that movie. He shows up, right? Another barbarian shows up, and he is able to go out to both of these barbarians that he knows are incredibly superstitious and preach at them such a fiery sermon that they will be destroyed, they're going to hell, God will end their life in terrible ways, maybe like Herod and worms, whatever. He's fiery, and scares them so bad that both of them at different times actually retreat from Rome, which the people see as incredible and amazing. That boosts his power, that boosts his prestige. As a result, Gregory emerged as the first bishop of Rome to display the full power and authority that is connoted by the word pope. The word is a bit confusing since it comes from the Latin word father. In the 2nd century, every bishop was called pope, though the word did not mean what it does now. It's always difficult for Protestants to answer the question, who was the first pope, because one must first talk distinctions. And so we have the structure of the Catholic Church focused on one man, the new Pontifex Maximus, essentially taking the place of the emperor, hosting councils, binding decisions, and I'll finish up quick. The Pontifex Maximus, just in case that's a question, you can kind of see it there in blue. I'll send it out. It's on the front of his palace, Pontifex Maximus. The Roman Empire ends up with the same structure. The early Roman Catholic Church ends up with the same structure as the Roman Empire, and Rome is preserved in the Roman Catholic Church. All right, it is time. I see some questions out there, so feel free to come up and talk to me, but we are time, so thank you, everyone.